Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, it's 9:30 on Tuesday the 24th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with Emily Carver and me, Tom Harwood. Coming up today.
2 hostages released by Hamas, one of whom has family in the United Kingdom. The Foreign Office says it will continue to work tirelessly to secure the release of more hostages. Does this renew hope for those caught up in the war? Our security editor Mark White has the latest from Israel.
Well, the French President Emmanuel Macron is the latest world leader to arrive here in Israel. He's been speaking with the families of French-Israeli hostages, and he's offered his full support to Israel in its war against Hamas.
Success or sinking ship? Today is Rishi Sunak's first anniversary of him becoming Conservative Party leader. He has had a turbulent 365 days and is facing discontent amongst his own MPs after devastating by-election results.
And the NatWest files. It's been revealed in new documents that staff at NatWest Bank wanted to throw milkshake at Nigel Farage over the debanking row. He addressed the findings on his show last night.
This was the culture that Dame Alison Rose took NatWest to, and I hope the board deal with it properly.
Now, this show is nothing without you and your input, so please do email in your thoughts and opinions on all of the stories we're covering today. gbviews@gbnews.com is the address to email. But before we get to all of that, let's have a little look at the latest headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, guys. Good morning. It's 9:31. Our top stories. The government says at least 10 British citizens have been killed in the Israel-Hamas war, and a further 6 are still missing. The confirmation comes after British national Yocheved Lifshitz was released by her kidnappers. Hamas says the 85-year-old, along with Israeli citizen Nurit Cooper, were freed on humanitarian grounds. Their husbands are still being held. Israeli sources say the move is straight out of the Hamas playbook, and it will not divert them from, quote, unrelenting attacks on the terror group. The country's president, Isaac Herzog, says every hostage must be released.
There's no difference, none at all, and I said it to the families themselves, between an Israeli citizen or anyone who holds another citizenship parallel to Israeli citizens, citizenship. At the end, all Israelis are one, soldier, citizen, and foreign national. They're all one, and for us, we want them back immediately.
Meanwhile, Israel's military says it's ready for the next stage of war. A spokesperson says they're awaiting political instruction and are anticipating long weeks of fighting ahead. The aerial assault in Gaza is also intensifying, with the military saying it hit more than 400 targets overnight, killing dozens of Hamas terrorists. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry says more than 120 civilians were killed in the latest strikes. A British cargo ship has collided with another vessel in the North Sea off the German coast. The ships Polsey and Verity crashed about 14 miles southwest of the island of Helgoland. One person has been rescued from the water and a search is underway for several others who fell overboard. The British-flagged Verity reportedly sank. Parts of the UK devastated by floods are facing another deluge. A yellow weather warning for heavy rain has been issued for the East Midlands and Yorkshire, hitting areas which are still recovering from Storm Babette. The Met Office says there's a small chance that homes and businesses could be flooded. The weather warning will remain in place until 4 p.m. And the rate of UK unemployment remains unchanged at 4.2% in the 3 months to August. But despite real earnings outpacing inflation for the first time in nearly 2 years, there's a mixed view of the job market. Pay growth is slowing and job vacancies have fallen for the 15th consecutive time. There was also a fall of 11,000 in the number of UK workers on payrolls in September. The Work and Pensions Secretary saying that inactivity has fallen by over 250,000 since the pandemic peak. You can get more on those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now let's get back to Tom and Emily.
Good morning. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver, and Tom Harwood. So, there was some hopeful news overnight as two elderly female hostages, one of which has family in the United Kingdom, has been released by Hamas on humanitarian grounds, apparently, after a deal was reached between the Qatari and Egyptian governments.
Yes, the Foreign Office has said it will continue to work tirelessly on securing the release of more hostages. Of course, only a handful have so far been released of over 200. Well, Mark White joins us live from Tel Aviv with the very latest. And Mark, do we have any indication on how this deal was achieved?
Well, negotiations through Egypt and the International Red Cross with Hamas. Now, Hamas have said that they released these two women on humanitarian grounds, but the Israeli Defense Forces spokesman at the morning briefing this morning said that actually it's completely cynical, and the video of that release with those Hamas terrorists handing drinks and biscuits to these two elderly women was just completely cynical, because he said these are exactly the same terrorists who slaughtered 1,400 people on the 7th of October. And there is real concern, I think, amongst the Israeli politicians and the military about this tactic that Hamas has adopted. They say it's right out of the Hamas playbook. It's about stalling, really, for time, trying to create more time so that they can dig in and prepare for that inevitable ground invasion, because every time they release a hostage or two, a drip of release of hostages, then it's understandable that countries around the world that may have nationals who are being held by Hamas are pressuring Israel to hold off that ground offensive to allow more time for the negotiations to continue.
Now, Mark, later on in the show, we'll be hearing directly from a press conference with Israeli ministers. We're also going to be hearing from some of the victims' families, either with the family who are being held hostage or sadly fallen victim to the Hamas atrocities. I want to ask what's happened overnight in terms of the bombardment. We've heard that Israel has very much ramped up strikes on Hamas. What have we seen?
Yeah, there's been no let-up, really, in the airstrikes that Israel has launched on Hamas targets. 400 sites were struck in the last 24 hours, according to the IDF. They included dozens of Hamas gunmen who were planning apparently to launch rockets towards Israel. Dozens of other buildings that the IDF say were linked to Hamas were also struck, including a mosque where a Hamas compound was located underneath that mosque as well. And it's not just in Gaza. There has been strikes that have been taking place in northern Israel on the border with southern Lebanon, where Hezbollah fighters have been launching regular attacks across the border, firing anti-tank missiles and alike into Israeli communities and towards Israeli military installations. Well, the Israeli forces say that they launched air and ground strikes against those Hezbollah terrorists. There is real concern, of course, that potentially they could decide to enter this war in a more meaningful way rather than the sporadic attacks at the moment. And Israel is warning Hezbollah that if it does that, it will be the biggest mistake of its life.
Now, Mark, you mentioned, of course, the French president's visit to Israel today. There seems to have been some sort of divide really growing between perhaps European Union voices and the British and the Americans. The British and the Americans saying that Israel has an absolute right to defend itself. Meanwhile, the French Prime Minister saying yesterday that there should be some sort of humanitarian truce. And Josep Borrell, one of the EU's top diplomats, saying there should be a halt to Israeli bombing. Is there a difference here between the Europeans and the Americans and the Brits?
Well, certainly, if you take his words that were spoken meeting with the Israeli president this morning, then Emmanuel Macron appears to be on the same page as the US and the UK. Very publicly, at least, he said that yes, the priority has to be to get the release of all of the hostages, and he met with French-Israeli families of people being held hostage when he arrived in Tel Aviv this morning. But as he met with the Israeli president, he said that France is absolutely full square behind Israel in its endeavours to go after Hamas, and that he fully supports Israel in its campaign to eradicate this terrorist group.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mark White there, our security editor, live from Tel Aviv.
Now, the Met Police Chief, Sir Mark Rowley, has said that hate crime laws probably need redrawing in the wake of a pro-Palestine rally where jihad chants were heard.
Yes, Sir Mark said police were ruthless in tackling anybody who puts their foot over the legal line. But, he added, our job is to enforce that line. Parliament's job is to draw that line. Maybe some of the lines aren't in the right place.
Downing Street said there were, quote, no plans to give police more power. Indeed, Minister for Policing Chris Philp told reporters that powers are already in place for the police to have at their disposal.
There are very clear laws in place which ban encouraging people to commit acts of terrorism. Certain organisations, including Hamas and Hezbollah, are prescribed. That means they're banned, and being a member of those organisations or glorifying them is an offence as well. There is also quite strong public order legislation on the statute books already, including Section 18 of the Public Order Act, which criminalises inciting racial hatred.
Interesting there what Chris Philp had to say. Already laws in place inciting violence and racial hatred. So with us is former Labour MP Simon Danczuk, joins us in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Clearly, it's a difficult one for the police. Do you think that they struck the right balance?
No, I don't think they have at all. I don't think it's a difficult one. I think the reality is that the police need to get on with policing effectively. And Sir Mark Rowley knows exactly what the vast majority of the public think. They think that the police should be arresting people who are inciting terrorism, who are encouraging hatred on the streets of London. And so they need to make some arrests. And I said this at the beginning of this this whole incident in the Middle East, that we would have problems on our streets. We have over time imported Islamic extremism over a number of years. There's been a failure of multiculturalism. Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, is exactly right to say that that's failed. We've let preachers in mosques run rife in terms of preaching hate. We are harbouring Hamas organisers in central London. This is the situation that we're in. So in the short term, we need to make arrests. That's what the police should have been doing during these protests. And in the longer term, we really need some political leadership where somebody comes forward and starts redrawing the boundaries around what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable.
So why do you, sorry, can I just ask, why do you think the police have been so light touch? We saw after the incident where we heard jihad being chanted on the streets of central London, that in their statement they said jihad has many different meanings.
Yeah, I think it's all around the police having the wrong culture and the wrong agenda. And that's what we see with Sir Mark Rowley, and we've seen it before, and I'll give you a great example, or a terrible example in actual fact. I was the MP for Rochdale, large Muslim population there. We have the Rochdale grooming scandal occur, and the first thing that the Greater Manchester Chief Constable did is come to Rochdale and say, I have arrived to celebrate multiculturalism. That's what he said. In the light of the Rochdale grooming scandal, he couldn't have got his words more inappropriate. But that's they focus more on being social workers than they do on being police officers, and that's a real concern.
Do you think the problem here with Suella Braverman's comments, because there were a lot of people criticising them who said, hang on, you're the daughter of immigrants, the Prime Minister is the son of immigrants, hasn't multiculturalism succeeded? Do you think that when some people hear the word multiculturalism, they think a multiracial society, and when other people hear multiculturalism, they think parallel cultures existing together and it's nothing to do with the colour of people's skin? Are there sort of two parallel conversations that people are having?
I think that's a really interesting point, actually, and I think there is. I would agree with you that there is confusion about what is acceptable. But a wider point related to that is that the Labour Party really get off the hook on this issue, because I am in no doubt. I was in the Labour Party for very many years, and the reality is that they'd be even more relaxed about these issues, and have been in the past. But nobody's challenging Keir Starmer at the moment, or because he's rehearsing for the big job. He wants to be Prime Minister. What's his view in all of this? He won't want to see, I can guarantee he won't want to see protesters arrested. If we knew the truth, he wouldn't want that. He wouldn't want stronger legislation. They've opposed any stronger legislation in terms of public order offences. But he's not being challenged about any of that.
And yet what the Labour Party left would say is that Keir Starmer has been, well, I suppose they'd argue he's flip-flopped, but they'd also say that he's been perhaps more anti-Palestinian than his immediate predecessor. Is he walking an impossible line there, where people on the right will say he's not proposing stronger laws, and people on the left will say he's too supportive of Israel?
Oh, yeah, he's completely trying to walk a tightrope on this. A lot of the electorate, the Muslim community, vote disproportionately for Labour. He doesn't want to upset them, so he's trying to walk this tightrope. But it's not acceptable, because the reality is, by giving in to those groups within society, we've ended up with the situation that we're in now, where extremism is being propagated throughout the country, where protesters can say what they want, and it shows that multiculturalism hasn't worked.
I think some of our politicians may well be intimidated. Just on what some of the things that Sir Mark Rowley said, interesting. He suggested that perhaps the law should change. Is that his place? And also he said that because the police can't be expected to enforce taste and decency. Interesting choice of words there.
Yeah, well, it does seem to be, it's a good point that you make. He's sort of, he's entering the political realm, isn't he? the policing minister was quite clear. There's legislation there that enables the police to take action, and that's what the public want. They want the police to take action, and this isn't the first time they've been inactive or where they've took action that's inappropriate and people don't think they should be taking action. The culture within the British police is completely wrong at the top echelons of the various forces that we have across the country. I think on the front line, police officers know what's right and what's wrong, but I think at a senior level they just keep getting it wrong, and this is another example of it.
So when the policing minister stands there in Downing Street yesterday and says the police have these laws on the books, they should just enforce them, and then when the head of the Met Police says we don't have these laws, you need to make new laws so that we can, who's right there, the policing minister or the head of the Met Police?
The policing minister is right in this instance, absolutely. We need more direct action by the police. That's what the public are calling for, and that's what they want to see. And all they had to do is, early on in these protests, is make some arrests, and they would have succeeded, because others who were coming onto the streets would have known that they would get arrested if they acted inappropriately.
It's interesting you say that, because yesterday we spoke to Shabnam Chowdhury, who was a former Met superintendent, and she said the police made the right call.
Oh, well, I've no doubt. She's obviously a member of the higher echelons of the police force and reaches this conclusion, but it's just wrong. The public just do not buy into this form of policing. You know, I saw a clip on social media of a guy climbing up a scaffold, waving the flag. He climbs back down it and he's handed his flag back by the police and let to go on his way. Why would you allow protesters to do things that just aren't acceptable? And it's almost as though the police are facilitating it. That's how the public think.
I think there's a lot of fear, particularly when these are political issues that are so divisive and they mobilise different communities in this way. Very difficult.
I think it's also important to note that there have been a number of arrests for people who perhaps have been very clearly over the line, but I think there has been criticism that that line might have been drawn too far as well. So I think the police would say there that they have made 1 or 2 arrests, although, of course, clear political criticism over how far those arrests go.
Yes, well, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. We were going to get on to Rishi Sunak's first 365 days in office, but I think that was very interesting indeed, so thank you for your input there. Former Labour MP Simon Danchett joined us there. So, moving on, the Met Office has warned of further heavy downpours in areas already flooded. That's as a result of Storm Babbitt.
Yes, the Environment Agency said flooding could last until Wednesday in parts of England. It said around 1,250 homes in England had already been impacted, and an estimated 30,000 properties needed flood protections.
Yes, there are yellow weather warnings for heavy rain, which could lead to further flooding in the East Midlands, much of Yorkshire, including Sheffield, Leeds and York and Humberside.
Now, the Minister for Environment has been forced to defend the government's record on flood defence spending.
We've invested £2.6 billion in flood defences right across the country. That was over 300,000 homes. We're partway through a programme. We're spending a further £5.2 billion over a 6-year time period. Now, I'm conscious that doesn't matter to them because their homes are being flooded today. So one of the things that the Member of Parliament, Brendan, inviting me up was to come and see some of this directly. I know that this was some of the roads that were evacuated following a severe flood warning. The Chief Executive of the Environment Agency is elsewhere in Nottinghamshire today. I think it's important to come and see people whose lives have been disrupted.
And GB News Scotland reporter Tony Maguire joins us from Brecon. Tony, who you got with you?
Good morning. Well, yeah, it's day 5 here since Storm Babbitt flooded Brecon, and I'm joined this morning by Scott Murray. He's the owner of East Mill Caravan Park here in Brecon. And Scott, tell me about the last few days and what it's been like, kind of picking up the pieces.
It's been pretty devastating. I mean, there's a lot of people lost all their belongings and their houses, like sort of thing.
And some of the damage, I mean, you can see behind a lot of porches smashed, etc. You know, what's that been like?
We'll just basically have to start again, really. It's just pick away a bit at a time.
Now, I spoke to your dad on Friday, and he painted a really vivid picture of what it was like. But I'd like to hear it kind of from you, and the events of very early on Friday morning. Tell me about that.
About 5 o'clock, just back at 5 in the morning, we went from dry feet to basically waist deep water in less than 5 to 10 minutes.
Incredible. And it felt very much like a tsunami, you were saying?
It was just a little tsunami we got hit here with. As I say, the force of the water has been unbelievable.
And obviously quite a few dozen caravans here. Most people got out, obviously, in time?
Most of the caravans were empty. It was just the residents here at the time. Most of them were out. We had a few migrant workers as well. They were all out. The elderly were out. It was just a few stragglers that was here left, just sorting out their pets and stuff like that got caught out a wee bit with the speed of the water and how quick it filled up, really.
Just lastly and quickly, obviously, insurance has been a big talking point. You have been flooded before. Are you hoping that obviously everything is resolved in a timely manner?
Well, the insurance boy's just standing there now anyway. We'll go and have a chat with him and see what he's saying. Hopefully we'll get some funding for the government as well. First Minister was up yesterday, so hopefully they can get going and we'll get a little bit of funding to help out as well. It's going to be phenomenal.
It sounds like not an unusual story given the events of the last week, but no less kind of difficult to hear. It'll take a while for things to get back to normal in Brecon.
Well, Tony, thank you so much for bringing us that very latest from Brecon, where, of course, the clear-up is still going on. Up next, let's have a little look at what's coming on in the weather.
Hello, very good morning to you. Here's your latest GB News weather update. I'm Alex Burkill, and today is definitely going to be a wetter picture for many compared to yesterday, with a little bit of thunder and some brisk winds too. The heaviest, most persistent rain will be across the eastern northeastern parts of England. Here we could see totals of 30 to 50 millimetres building up, so some travel disruptions quite likely, perhaps even a bit of flooding as well. Elsewhere across other parts, some sunny spells, but also quite a few showers, and particularly in the south, these showers could be hefty and bring the risk of some thunder as well. Temperatures near normal for the time of year, highs around 14-15 Celsius in the south, a little bit cooler further north. As we go through the end of the day, we are going to see a swathe of wet weather pushing its way in initially across the southwest, but then feeding eastwards around southern counties of England. That could be quite heavy at times as we go through the night. Also notice then towards eastern parts of Scotland, we are going to drag in some rain from the North Sea. Temperatures for many tonight will be a little bit lower than last night, so it could be a bit chilly, especially where we have the clear skies towards the west. Through Wednesday, that heavy rain initially in the south-southeast will clear away, so turning drier here, but staying cloudy and wet across eastern parts of Scotland, where we already saw that significant rainfall last week, so that could make some ongoing issues worse. Otherwise, a drier spell before more rain starts to push its way in from the west later, and temperatures for many similar to today. Bye-bye.
Well, up next, we'll be looking back on Rishi Sunak's first 365 days since becoming Conservative Party leader. Yes, 1 whole year. Has he impressed you?
I can't believe it's been a whole year. Can you? Time flies when you're having fun.
To some extent, it feels like he's been there forever. But another extent, I mean, it didn't feel that long ago that Boris Johnson stopped being Prime Minister, or even stopped being an MP.
But has he turned things around since Liz Truss? Let us know what you think. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel.
We're here for the show.
More energy this time.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us. From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good morning, it's 10 a.m. on Tuesday the 24th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver, and Tom Harwood. So coming up this hour...
Success or sinking ship? Today is Rishi Sunak's first anniversary of becoming Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister. Our political editor, Christopher Hope, has been looking at his tenure so far.
That's right, he's miles behind in the polls, but what can he do to restore them? Let's find out.
And 2 hostages released by Hamas, one of whom has family in the United Kingdom. The Foreign Office says it will continue to work tirelessly to secure the release of more hostages.
Unchanged unemployment. 4.2% of the population do not have a job. Do we need greater incentives to get people back to work? We'll have the latest.
And real living wage rise. Today, the rate has increased by 10% to support workers during the ongoing cost of living crisis. Good news for some, maybe not for others.
And we'd love to know what you think on all of the topics we're discussing today. Get involved. This show is nothing without your input. We'll be getting to some of your emails in just a moment, and a reminder of the address to email into gbviews@gbnews.com. But before all of that, let's get a news update with Ray Addison.
Thanks, guys. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. Our top stories this hour. The government says at least 10 British citizens have been killed in the Israel-Hamas war, and a further 6 are still missing. The confirmation comes after British national Yocheved Lifshitz was released by her kidnappers. Hamas says the 85-year-old, along with Israeli citizen Nurit Cooper, were freed on humanitarian grounds. Their husbands are still being held. Israeli sources say the move is straight out of the Hamas playbook, and it will not divert them from, quote, unrelenting attacks on the terror group. The country's President Isaac Herzog says every hostage must be released.
There's no difference, none at all, and I said it to the families themselves, between an Israeli citizen or anyone who holds another citizenship parallel to Israeli citizens, citizenship. At the end, all Israelis are one: soldier, citizen, and foreign national. They're all one, and for us, we want them back immediately.
Meanwhile, Israel's military says it's ready for the next stage of war. A spokesperson says they're awaiting political instruction and are anticipating long weeks of fighting ahead. The aerial assault in Gaza is also intensifying, with the military saying it hit more than 400 targets overnight, killing dozens of Hamas terrorists. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry says more than 120 civilians were killed in the latest strikes. Well, more than 40 trucks are now waiting by the border to enter Gaza. That's despite US President Joe Biden urging for a continuous flow of humanitarian aid to the Strip. Yesterday, a third convoy of 20 trucks delivered water, food and medicine, taking the total to 54 since Saturday. However, the UN is warning that fuel was not included in that delivery and reserves could run out tomorrow. A rescue effort is underway after two ships collided in the North Sea. The incident off the German coast, southwest of Heligoland, involved British-flagged vessel the Verity and the Polsey. One person was rescued from the water, but several others are still missing. The Verity, which was on its way from Bremen to the English town of Immingham, reportedly sank. Parts of the UK devastated by floods are facing another deluge. A yellow weather warning for heavy rain has been issued for the East Midlands and Yorkshire, hitting areas which are still recovering from Storm Babette. The Met Office says there's a small chance that homes and businesses could again be flooded. The warning will remain in place until 4 p.m. Kevin Maunder, who lives in Retford, says the recent weather has been difficult.
To start, despair. Oh no, not again. The water slowly crept in and there was nothing we could do. So I'm old, I get quite philosophical and think, well, c'est la vie, what will be will be. I can't alter it. I don't know what we could do, we just had to hope for the best. We were very lucky, it didn't come right through ours. Some of the neighbours, it's just devastation it was when we was helping them out.
The government is reportedly considering ending the use of 100 migrant hotels. The Prime Minister is expected to make a series of announcements on immigration ahead of the general election. Contracts will be terminated with hotels in areas that will be key election battlegrounds. The government hopes the move will address anger over the small boat crisis. The hotels in places including Stoke and Wigan will stop taking migrants by the end of March. The rate of UK unemployment remains unchanged at 4.2% in the 3 months to August. But despite real earnings outpacing inflation for the first time in nearly 2 years, there's a mixed view of the job market. Pay growth is slowing and job vacancies have fallen for the 15th consecutive time. There was also an 11,000 drop in the number of UK workers on payrolls in September. The Work and Pensions Secretary says inactivity has fallen by over 250,000 since the pandemic peak. The real living wage is set to increase by 10% amid the ongoing cost of living crisis. The rate will rise to £12 an hour outside of London and £13.15 in the capital. Over 460,000 employees are expected to benefit from the increase. And almost 4 million people, including 1 million children, experienced the most extreme form of poverty in the UK last year. That's according to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which describes the findings as a political choice. Their report says the figure for children almost trebled since 2017 and topped 1 million for the first time since 2015. It's due to very low incomes, the rising cost of living and high levels of debt. The government says it continues to work on driving down inflation. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now let's get back to Tom and Emily.
Welcome back. Let's cross live now to the Israeli press conference for the two women released by Hamas last night.
והם השתוללו אצלנו בקיבוץ, אותי חטפו, השכיבו אותי על אופנוע, על הצד, וכל הזמן, וטסו איתי בשדות החרושים.
Now, these are individuals speaking at a medical centre in Israel, of course, released by Hamas just last night. Two women who had been held hostage for over 2 weeks. Some of the thought to be over 200 hostages held by the terrorist group. In a video released by Hamas, we saw these individuals be given biscuits and warm drinks by terrorists with their faces covered in what seemed to be a propaganda effort from the terror group, almost pretending to be more humane than being the same group which beheaded babies and burnt children alive just over 2 weeks ago.
Yes, we spoke to Mark White, our security editor, earlier in the show about the hostage situation. He said that Hamas had said they were releasing these hostages for humanitarian reasons. Israel, however, says that this is a cynical ploy and this is a normal tactic from the organisation that is Hamas. As you can see, she looks, well, she's a very elderly woman there, surrounded by press, being asked very many questions. I understand she's speaking in Hebrew currently, but we will get translation for you, I'm sure. But we're going to be bringing in Mark White now, just to give us a little bit of context. Mark, are you there? Can you tell us how significant this hostage conference is? Mark,
well,
are you there for us?
Well, it's significant. Of course, it's a very happy... Yes, indeed, I am here. It's significant. It is, as far as the family are concerned, a very happy and welcome development. But remember, the husbands of both these women are still being held by Hamas. So while, yes, there's joy at the release of these two elderly women, there's real concern about the two fathers that are still being held by Hamas. 220 hostages that we know of. There's likely to be more than that, because Israel is still in the process of trying to determine who is a hostage, whether people have actually been killed and their bodies not recovered yet or identified yet. So that's why each day that number tends to rise by a few others. But at the moment, it's 220 hostages. And we've got Emmanuel Macron, who's here in Tel Aviv. He was meeting himself with family members of French-Israeli hostages being held by Hamas. He said the priority has to be, of course, to get those hostages released, but he also put his full-throated support behind Israel. He was sitting with the Israeli president and said that he fully supported Israel in its endeavour to go in, inevitably in a ground war, of course, after Hamas, and to destroy that terror organisation. France, of course, he said, had suffered from Islamist terrorism in the past as well, and continues to have a significant problem.
Now, Mark, there seems to be a big propaganda effort going on at the moment. The video released by Hamas tried to present this terrorist organisation as almost a caring group, with the people that it didn't slaughter being given tea and biscuits. I wonder, is this propaganda effort by Hamas one of the reasons why the tanks that are currently amassed on the border between Israel and Gaza have not yet made that ground invasion? Why is there this delay for this big ground invasion?
Well, it certainly may be playing in some shape or form. It's straight out of the Hamas playbook, is what sources have told me, that the Hamas terrorist group will drip feed the release of hostages, potentially over many months, to try to get more time to reinforce their positions, to prepare traps for the Israeli forces when they eventually go in on the ground in Gaza, and of course to try to divide Israel and its supporters, because of course, although you've got these very public displays of support coming from the French president there, from the US and the UK leaders as well, behind the scenes, undoubtedly they are urging caution and perhaps a delay to the beginning of that ground war, because they want to see everything done that can possibly be done to try to ensure that these hostages are released. But Israel says that it will not be diverted from its task of trying to go after Hamas. At the moment, it's doing that in an aerial form, in the guise of missile strikes and fighter jet strikes on Gaza itself, and indeed in the north of the country, where we know that Hezbollah terrorists have been firing anti-tank missiles and other rockets and missiles intermittently over that border into communities in northern Israel. But for the families that are speaking at this news conference at the moment at this medical centre here in Tel Aviv, there is undoubted relief at the release of these two elderly, frail women that were held hostage for more than 2 weeks now. Doctors have examined them. They say despite that ordeal, they seem to be in pretty good health, which is to be welcomed. However, the family members have got to be concerned. They are concerned about the fathers, the husbands of these two women who are still being held by those Hamas terrorists.
Mark, just to remind our viewers, we are currently watching, and our listeners, we are currently watching a hostage conference, a news conference at the hospital in Tel Aviv, where this elderly lady, Yocheved Lipschitz, is recovering after being freed from Hamas last night. Mark, her daughter told the BBC earlier today that her mother is keen to share information. What sort of information could she share?
Well, depending on, her mental state and how she is after her ordeal of 2 weeks under Hamas control, she might well have some valuable information to share in terms of any indication she might have about where she was held. Does she know, was she held above ground or below ground? Was it far in terms of the drive to the eventual point where she was handed over the Rafah crossing? How many other people were held with her? Was there a large group of hostages, or was it much smaller groups? That kind of information. Also, who was guarding them, what she noticed about them, how many of them there were, how well armed they might have been. There's lots of information potentially that these two women could share with the Israel Defense Forces, who are preparing at some point, of course, to go into Gaza, and that might be at a point where many hostages are still being held, and it could be vital in helping them get an understanding of the kind of conditions that hostages are being held in.
Yes, Mark, we're hearing translation that this elderly lady, 85 years old, she says she's been through hell. She describes how she was kidnapped by Hamas gunmen on motorbikes. She says they brought her into Gaza through a gate, with the ride causing her to suffer bruises. She also says she struggled to breathe. She adds that the Israeli government spent billions on the border fence, but it did nothing to stop Hamas from getting through. So she continues to recount what has happened to her to the very many press who are present there.
Well, yes, interesting that she voiced her anger, it seems, at the fact that there is this Israeli fence that should protect Israeli communities from any attacks over that border. I'm sure those concerns are shared by many people right across Israel, and those questions will have to be answered at some point, along with the very obvious intelligence failures about how the Israeli military and intelligence services did not pick up on what was a very complex plan being planned, we're told, for up to a year by these Hamas terrorists. But yes, you're right, she's describing the ordeal as well, and it sounds absolutely terrifying. We saw some of the videos of elderly hostages. As she says, she was on a motorbike. We saw some videos of an elderly woman on a motorbike, another woman in a pickup truck. And yes, it must have been absolutely terrifying for this woman, not knowing, having seen what was happening to other people around her, whether she would live or die. Well, very thankfully, she has now been released. But those images and that ordeal will live with her. And of course, she'll be absolutely beside herself, knowing that her husband is still in the hands of these terrorists.
Certainly. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your analysis there live from Tel Aviv, as we've been seeing these stunning pictures of that hostage, Yeshukvez Livshitz, who has been released by Hamas overnight and is being comforted now, as well as asked questions of in a hospital in central Tel Aviv.
Yes, talking about her ordeal there. So we'll move on to domestic news. Today marks 1 year since Rishi Sunak became Conservative Party leader. He certainly had a turbulent 365 days, hasn't he? We're joined now by Conservative MP Greg Smith and also Labour MP Steve McCabe to give their assessment. So, Greg, I'll start with you. What has Rishi Sunak achieved in the last 365 days?
Good morning. Well, I think, first of all, as you said yourself, it's been a turbulent time. And I think politics has stabilised a little bit. Events always take over and curveballs are thrown. But I think politics has stabilised far more than it had been for the years that preceded that, through the pandemic, through going back to 2019, the parliamentary gridlock that led to the 2019 general election. And in the last year, I think that politics has stabilised. And I think the Prime Minister is now, having bedded in that time, started to announce things that are going to really resonate in time with the British public. The more sensible, pragmatic approach to net zero, seeing sense on HS2. Still needs to go the whole way and get rid of phase one, but seeing sense on that and actually delivering things, particularly for the Midlands and the North, that are going to actually improve people's lives. We need to see more of that coming out of Downing Street, and particularly something around the cost of living, around the tax burden that we're asking people to pay at the moment. That needs to come down.
Steve McCabe, Greg Smith there, pointing to some policy changes that we've seen, particularly in the last few months. He's describing a better direction from the country. I'm guessing you disagree with that.
Well, I think the Prime Minister is possibly doing his best, but he is a prisoner to factions in his own party. It's kind of obvious that he's not really in control, and that policy is being made by little factions within the Tory party at the moment. It's utterly reactive politics, and they don't have a grip at all. And of course, his own position over something like the farce of not being able to find the phone for the COVID inquiry does call into question his own integrity.
Steve, just another question to you. Rishi Sunak's 5 priorities: halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting NHS waiting lists and stopping the boats. Same priorities as Keir Starmer on paper.
Well, there are some similarities. I suppose the difference is that Keir didn't create these problems, and he hasn't set impossible deadlines with which to deal with them. And we would approach all of them differently.
Greg, same question to you. Is it not the case that there just isn't much difference these days between what the Labour Party is offering and what the Conservative Party is offering?
I think there is a fundamental difference, that it's actually the Conservative government that are trying to grapple with many of the problems, many of which were actually thrown up by the COVID pandemic, by the backlogs that came about because of that, because of the sheer scale of government debt that was taken on in order to pay people's wages through furlough and the business grants, etc., that has created, the lion's share of our economic problems. I think it's the Conservatives that can actually grapple that can, if necessary, on the small boats issue, face down the legal establishment, and if there needs to be a plan B, if the Supreme Court goes against us, take the measures that will be necessary to disapply parts of the ECHR. In some ways, I hope it doesn't have to come to that level of row, but there will be clear blue water between us and the Labour Party, because I'm confident it's the Conservatives that will actually face those problems down.
Well, voters certainly need a choice. Steve McCabe seems to have gone, disappeared, vanished. But thank you very much to Steve McCabe, Labour MP, and, of course, Conservative MP Greg Smith. They're debating Rishi Sunak's first 365 days in the job.
Well, still to come, more than 460,000 people will receive a wage rise aligned with the voluntary Real Living Wage scheme. What does it all mean? Liam Halligan will be in the studio to explain it all.
He will. We're GB News, Britain's news channel. Stay with us.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back. You're watching Britain's Newsroom with Emily Carver and me, Tom Harwood. Now, unemployment has stayed stable at 4.2% in the 3 months to August. This comes as hundreds of thousands of UK workers will see a 10% pay rise because their employer is signed up to something called the Voluntary Real Living Wage Scheme.
Yes, this wage, this real living wage, will increase to reflect the ongoing cost of living crisis for workers. But joining us in the studio, we have our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Now, we've got a number of things to get through. Where would you like to start?
Well, it's a year on since Rishi Sunak entered number 10, and basically the economy is flatlining. It's not in recession. The German economy is in recession, but it's not doing nearly as well as the US economy, which is actually growing quite well. Let's have a look at some of the data that's come out today. As you said, Tom, unemployment is pretty much unchanged at 4.2%, still very low by historic standards. That's between June and August this year. But, of course, there are an awful lot of people who just aren't part of the workforce anymore, the kind of missing millions. So that's a slightly flattering number. We have GDP numbers that come out, the official numbers on the size of the economy, but we have indicative survey numbers from the private sector which kind of preempt the GDP numbers. They're called the Purchasing Managers Index. And a Purchasing Managers Index reading of 50 plus means growth and less than 50 means less than growth. And check this out, our manufacturing sector, still about 15% of the UK economy, 45.2 in October, slightly up on September, but still less than 50.
Predicting a contraction in the future.
Yeah, that's right. That's pointing to a slowdown in manufacturing when the official GDP numbers for October come out. The service sector, which of course is 80% of our economy, not just financial services, but hospitality, a whole host of other things, that's at 49.2. That's down slightly from 49.3 in September, so just below 50. So the economy is flatlining 1 year on from Rishi Sunak taking over. And, of course, the next interest rate decision is on Thursday, the 2nd of November. That's next Thursday. I personally think, given that the economy is flatlining, I think the Bank of England will keep interest rates on hold at 5.25%.
This is interesting because the PMI figures suggest that actually we might have a small contraction, although I guess there's sort of wiggle room there. It might be slight growth, slight negative growth. If you're the Chancellor, that's a very unhappy picture to be looking at, probably less tax revenue coming in than you might want. But if you're the Bank of England, or if you're looking at wanting interest rates to be at least stable, the fact that our economy isn't overheating is probably indicative of stable interest rates.
Indeed, and the Bank of England will stand accused of driving the economy into a recession. We've already got 14 interest rate rises in the tank, and they're now really starting to feed through. You can see it in the credit numbers, the demand for credit, the amount of credit banks are extending. That's slowing down the economy quite seriously now. But still, the British economy, it's battling. We're not yet in recession. A recession is 2 successive quarters of contraction. So that's basically 6 months, bar the shouting of negative PMI numbers or PMI numbers below 50. We've got 1 month there, and these things do bob around. These are surveys of business leaders, business owners, how they think it's going. They're not official numbers. But
so if it's 49 or 51, it's all sort of much of a muchness.
That's right. But look, the basic reality of this is the UK economy, the world economy, hasn't really recovered from the pandemic yet. We were meant to have this massive post-pandemic bounce back. It hasn't really happened. The Chinese economy is growing slowly by its standards, which is slowing down the rest of the world.
With the Eurozone of youth unemployment in China.
They've stopped publishing the youth unemployment numbers in China because they're so embarrassing for President Xi and the People's Republic. But look, it strikes me that the economy is doing just about OK. It's on a knife edge. The Bank of England, I would be really surprised if they raised rates next week. Of course, more data could come out between now and then. So if you've got a mortgage, it seems that you're not going to have to endure yet another interest rate rise. But if you're interested in rate rises for savings, then you're not going to get any extra money either. Look, has Rishi Sunak done enough? I don't think so. The next election is going to be all about the economy. They always are. The economy always dominates politics in the end. Sorry, but it's true. Rishi Sunak did steady the ship after Liz Truss, but it's not as if the UK economy is booming. And the other thing about these slow growth numbers, Tom, they're going to really put pressure on Jeremy Hunt, who's rumoured to be standing down from his seat in Surrey, of course. He won't quite confirm. Big pressure on him now from his own backbenchers for tax cuts. You've got former ministers like Jake Berry, Ranald Jayawardena, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Priti Patel, Liz Truss, of course. They're part of the Conservative Growth Group. I hear that is now 65 MPs, which is bigger than the government's majority. So if this autumn statement on the 22nd of November tries to put taxes up, a lot of Tory MPs aren't going to vote for it. And then you could have a no-confidence issue.
But, of course, tax cuts are only one lever the government has to boost growth. But we'll see, what does a flatlining economy mean to the great British public? What does it mean for the money in our pockets?
Well, thank you, Liam, for bringing us all of that. Still to come.
Sorry, Tom. No ifs, no buts. The Education Secretary has written to schools in England ordering them to make material used in children's sex education available to be seen by parents, warning head teachers there can be no more excuses.
And the Prime Minister blasts police. Rishi Sunak told police to tackle pro-Palestinian extremism head-on after fury over the failure to arrest protesters chanting jihad.
Yes, we've got that and much, much more after your morning news. First with Ray Addison.
Thank you. Good morning. It's 10:32, our top stories. A British hostage freed by Hamas says she was taken into tunnels that looked like a spider web. 85-year-old Yocheved Lifshitz, who was released by her kidnappers last night, also says she was treated well and was seen by a doctor during her ordeal. Hamas says she was returned along with Israeli citizen Nurit Cooper on humanitarian grounds. Their husbands are still being held. Her daughter Sharon translated her comments during a news conference a short while ago.
My mum is saying that she was taken on the back of a motorbike with her body, with her legs on one side and her head on another side, that she was taken through the ploughed fields with a man in front on one side and a man behind her, and that while she was being taken, she was hit by sticks by Shabab. Yeah, Shabab people. Until they reached the tunnels. There they walked for a few kilometers on the wet ground. There are a huge network of tunnels underneath. It looks like a spider web.
A rescue effort is underway after a British-flagged cargo ship collided with another vessel in the North Sea, southwest of Heligoland, off the German coast. The Verity crashed with the Polsey at around 4 o'clock this morning. One person was rescued from the water, but several others are still missing. Parts of the UK devastated by floods are facing another deluge. A yellow weather warning for heavy rain has been issued for the East Midlands and Yorkshire, hitting areas which are still recovering from Storm Babette. The warning will remain in place until 4 p.m. There's more on all of those stories on our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Let's take a look at the markets. The pound will buy you $1.2259 and 1.1512 euros. Price of gold, £1,608 and 62 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,353 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Ray. Now, still to come on the show, more reaction to the British hostage, Israeli hostage Yoka Lifshitz, freed by Hamas, who said she was taken into tunnels that looked like a spider web.
That's right. She's an Israeli hostage with a British daughter. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good morning, it's 10:39 and you're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Emily Carver.
Yes, in the last few minutes we heard from Yocheved Lifshitz, who was released by Hamas last night.
Yes, and she said in Hebrew, but has been translated, of course, by her daughter, describing her ordeal, being taken by motorbike, being held by Hamas, and of course she was there in Gaza for over 2 weeks.
Yes, and we know that at least 10 British nationals have been killed in this conflict. 6 were missing. We'll keep you up to date with the very latest from the hostage situation. But we are delighted to be joined in the studio by our senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, and political commentator and author, Tonya Buxton, to discuss this more. You heard in our bulletins, Tonya, this very elderly lady who was captured by Hamas, her daughter there to help with translation. Shocking.
It's shocking. She was hit with sticks all the way through the fields. She said there was a man in front of her, a man behind her, and they were just hitting her with sticks till they got through to the tunnels. It's horribly shocking for an elderly lady to have to go through that, and it's just not humane, isn't it? It's not humane behaviour.
And it's such a contrast to the video that Hamas has released last night of these terrorists with covers over their face handing tea and biscuits to the old ladies that they were releasing, almost pretending that they've been so nice to them throughout the last 2 weeks. This is pure, blatant propaganda.
It is blatant propaganda, but, you know, there is a relief to me that, because, you know, the imagination is worse than reality sometimes, and I was thinking that these people that are locked away for two weeks with them, I was expecting... So I think... Gosh, let's just hope it doesn't get any worse, because at least this lady's come out. She doesn't look like she's been bruised or too traumatised. We just don't want it to get worse, because Hamas are animals. They're animals. They're massacrists. Part of me is so fearful to provoke them to do anything else to the hostages. I'm so fearful for the hostages.
Nigel, we heard from the daughter of this elderly lady who was held hostage this morning. She told another media channel that... her mother would be willing to share information. She's keen to share information with the Israeli authorities. There could be some valuable information that she could share, couldn't there?
What she's got to say is absolutely crucial to any hope of releasing the other hostages. I mean, what she has said so far is she talked about this sort of spider web of tunnels that they've got. We already knew that. But when she actually speaks to the intelligence people from the Israeli services, at least she can start describing some kind of idea where she was held, perhaps where other hostages are held. So the mere fact that she is able to actually share that information, and she's obviously quite, you know, she's quite clear that she's happy to do that by the fact she's speaking at the moment. So despite the trauma she's gone through, she's perfectly prepared to come forward and say, right, now how can I help?
Now, she has said that she was first taken with around 24 people and then ended up with 5 people. I don't want to imagine the worst, but if this is one group of these 200-plus hostages, 220 hostages, they might have been the most nicely treated ones. They might have been the ones that Hamas wants to show to the world to pretend how nice they are.
I think they were penciled to be the ones to release, because they knew that they did know that they would be releasing some hostages as a bargaining tool. So you're right. Maybe these were ones that were penciled to be released, and who knows what's happened to the others. I mean, it's an unbearable... The families of these hostages, it's an unbearable existence for them waiting to find out what's going on.
Absolutely, it is. Shall we move on to another story? And this has to do with school sex education, Nigel.
Yes, it does indeed. And this is Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, who's writing to schools to say they must tell parents exactly what their children are learning in sex education classes. Schools have been sort of trying to delay all this and put obstacles in the way. One of them is copyright. They're saying that they can't share this because it's the copyright of the people who produce it. Gillian Keegan's having none of that. She's saying that parents must know what their children are learning. Absolutely right. I mean, I don't think parents should have a veto over the classes their children go to, but I don't see why sex education should be any different from history or economics or English, where parents actually do know what they can.
I mean, this is quite incredible. The Department for Education is providing template letters to fight off claims of copyright infringement, presumably to parents who want to see this material. Do you think that's right?
It's mind-blowing that this is being done, that it's not just common cause that parents should absolutely see what their children are studying. I was a primary school teacher 25 years ago. I was a primary school teacher for 8 years in Tottenham. And I actually ended up leaving because the way we educate our children was becoming further and further away from the way that I felt children should be educated. You know, teachers, there's a lot of bullying that goes on in the staff room. I wouldn't have put up with this. I would have been handing out the leaflets to the parents straight away. There's no way I would be giving the 11-year-olds, 10 and 11-year-olds that I was teaching this type of literature without letting the parents be aware. But I would have been sacked as a teacher. And this is the problem. You know, common sense has gone. And I said it to Nigel earlier. I said, the only people that don't want parents to know what their children are being told at school are paedophiles because they want to groom them with this kind of sick ideology. Parents need to be absolutely aware of what their children are being taught at all times. I have children to bring them up. I do not want the state bringing up my children. It's my responsibility to see what my children are taught. And especially these things that are kind of... we are coming through now that are just modern wokeism about gender and about all of this that's going on and breast binding. And children, are, especially teenagers, young teenagers, have enough to go through. They go through a real period of turmoil, of finding themselves. We don't want to be putting things in front of them. They're going to make that harder.
But they ought to learn about. They ought to learn about those kind of things too. This is what I mean about. Now we get into the controversial areas where I think parents shouldn't have the right to veto. So the fact that we talk about trans issues so much, for instance, I think that must play a part in the education of children. They're going to be curious about it. They're going to ask about it.
Well, and if they do, then the parents can answer them at home, can't they? I don't think there's a place for education about trans at school.
Well, it may well be for a child will find it more comfortable to talk to a teacher than they would to a parent, especially if it's something that they are thinking about doing.
Well, we saw what happened with that student that questions trans ideology in the classroom. That teacher was absolutely vile to her because there is a complete political element about this. So I don't agree.
Yes, a recording was uncovered from a classroom where two girls, I think,
very bright,
was shown to be dismissed, let's say, in strong terms by their teacher when they questioned certain areas of the gender discussion. Do you not think that parents should have a right to withdraw their children from sex education, or do you think that shouldn't happen?
No, I don't actually. I mean, I think that there's no reason why a parent can't complain about it. There's no reason why a parent shouldn't discuss with the school. And I think that when it comes down to what the curriculum is, this is a job for Parliament to actually sort out. So once that's been established, no, parents, because parents have to send their children to school or at least educate them in some way or another, and they can always get for homeschooling on that basis, that no, that they shouldn't then withdraw their children.
Nigel, this is an ideology. Of course, sex education should be taught in schools, but children should be taught how, you know, as we used to say in the old days, the birds and bees work. But this is an ideology that I don't believe schools should be.
Well, they shouldn't be taught something political. I agree with you. That I mean, politics shouldn't enter into.
But trans ideology is political. And therefore it shouldn't be taught to children.
Yes, but you could actually do it factually, in the same way that if you were teaching politics to children, you can still do that in a neutral way without being partisan.
But the leader of the party that you follow can't identify what a woman is. So how are they going to teach it factually when the leader of the Labour Party can't even identify women?
I think the issue here is not necessarily what the curriculum is, but it's the materials that teachers use in the classroom. They're often provided by outside bodies, and so therefore there is this copyright issue.
And who's ruling these bodies? Who's deciding if what these bodies are bringing into schools is correct?
Well, exactly, and that's clearly what the Education Secretary is trying to get a grip on.
Is there not a worry here that we saw what happened in Birmingham outside schools in the last couple of years, where religious groups have been trying to pull their own children out of schools, indeed hounding teachers at schools because they teach that gay people exist?
Yes.
And is there not a worry here that perhaps that same attitude might be behind some of this sex and relationship education scepticism that we're seeing now? Is there a parallel that can be drawn there?
You know, for me, there is a lot of common sense that goes on, and there's a lot of common sense that's been thrown out of the window. You know, a man is a man, a woman is a woman. Gay people, you know, are people that love the same sex. It's really confusing, though, with the trans issue, and I think that's where it gets very confusing. And teaching children, very young children, about breast binding, removing their breasts, this type of thing, I think at this complex time of their age shouldn't be down to the schools to decide. I think it needs a lot of reviewing before it's just thrown in by external bodies into schools of which parents can't see.
I think it's an extremely difficult one because, as Nigel says, children will ask questions. I mean, you know, the gender ideology, trans issues, transgenderism is something that they are exposed to. If they can't talk to their teachers about it, is that a problem? Is that a failure of education? I don't know. It's a difficult one. But I take your point, Tom, about the religious aspect. Could this lead to...
There are big questions in terms of how far the material goes. Is it just saying that trans people exist, or is it saying these are the processes that you can go down? I mean, those are two very different arguments. And I suppose transparency here is perhaps where the middle ground meets.
Yeah.
Yes, parents...
You have to take in mind children's psychology, and that's what they don't take in mind. Things are catchy. You know, when in a school, when a child starts self-harming, for example, it becomes a group, and then you find that there's a strong percentage of those children that start self-harming. Same with anorexia and same with trans issues. So we have to be very careful with teenage psychology and the way their brains are being formed.
There is certainly an element of social contagion in our schools, I'm sure. Shall we move on to what's been happening on our streets, Nigel? Rishi Sunak blasts Metropolitan Police for not acting on jihadi chants. We were discussing this earlier in the show, but what is your take?
That you shouldn't criminalise a word.
Seriously? Not even in the context?
Well, you shouldn't criminalise a word which has different meanings, and that's the point about jihadi. It does have different meanings. So I can't quite see that how you would get a prosecution in court for chanting that. Now, the police seems to me, Mark Rowley, the Met Commissioner, has been quite sensible about this. He says, look, if you're chanting jihadi at a protest, most people in this country would associate that with terror. But it also means other things. It means in a struggle, so that's the greater jihadi rather than the lesser one, which is the holy war.
I suppose here, Nigel, there's tone is important. In the same way that if you shout fire in a crowded theatre, that does not have the same free speech protections than if you're just talking about fire at a nice, reasonable conversation around a table
that's
like
true.
this. So if you shout jihad, perhaps that's a different sort of level of criticism than if you just were to say the word.
Context is key, Nigel.
Yes, context, but you're asking the police then to actually work on the basis of what was the tone, what was the context, and so on. And this is where I think Mark Rowley is right. If the government wants the police to do so with rigour, they've got to have more rigorous laws to actually do it. It's too vague on the margins on this one.
And Tonya, there's another piece here in The Sun asking, why do Met cops do nothing when protesters shout kill the Jews, yet they arrest women at silent vigil for Sarah Everard? Is that a fair comparison?
Absolutely fair. Same with what went on during the lockdown. Marches that we were all on, the police were really heavy-handed and vile to us, and yet they're not... I mean, I don't agree. I think once you shout out jihadi in a crowded place, as they are doing in these marches, it is a hate word, and yes, you should be arrested for it. I absolutely agree that and of course there are certain words that you can't use. None of us here would use the N-word. We would be called racist if we did. So that's acceptable. That's acceptable. But jihadi is fine, is it? You know, no, there are certain words that must be outlawed.
But are there, though? Because that's an interesting example. The N-word is an awful word that we shouldn't use, and society would rightly chastise people for using it. But you're not going to be imprisoned for using it.
I think you might, actually, under hate crimes. And just like, you know, again, we're going back to the trans issues, but there was people that had been gone to prison. The Christian evangelist, Dave McConnell, ended up having a fine of £620 for homophobic hate crime for saying a man is a man and a woman is a woman. So if this can happen, then, of course, these people that are protesting and shouting jihadi...
I think what we need to bear in mind is the context, and we've seen footage from there where there was clearly calls for, let's say, Muslim armies and violence at the same time.
Although
so
we
I think
shouldn't
that is
impugn
key.
every single protester with those same...
Of course, absolutely, separate rally.
Yes.
In the next few minutes, we'll take you to a press conference with 3 immediate family members of those murdered or taken hostage in the October the 7th Hamas massacres in southern Israel. We're GB News.
Hello again, it's Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. It's a wet picture today. Many of us will see some heavy rain or a scattering of showers, but also some sunny spells. Starting off looking at the bigger picture, and there are various low pressure systems out in the Atlantic. They are going to bring unsettled weather through this week, but at the moment we have a low pressure in the North Sea, and that is bringing some blustery winds to some North Sea coastal parts, but also a spell of heavy persistent rain across eastern northeastern parts of England. Here we could see totals building up, risk of some disruptions, some flooding is possible. Elsewhere, some sunny spells, and in the sunny spells, temperatures not doing too badly. Highs of around 15, possibly 16 Celsius, but there will also be quite a few showers around today as well. As we go later on, we are going to see that rain over eastern northeastern England easing a little bit, but some heavy rain then pushing into more southern parts of England and perhaps Wales. Again, here we could see some high totals, so some disruption is quite likely, some flooding is possible. For many, it's it's going to be a chillier night tonight, particularly in western parts where we have some clear skies, perhaps a touch of frost for Scotland. And then first thing Wednesday morning, a wet picture in the southeast, some heavy rain disruption likely during the morning rush hour, but that rain does clear away. Further rain then piling in from the North Sea, affecting eastern parts of Scotland, that coming in places where we're still recovering from Storm Babette. Otherwise then a drier slice before some wetter weather arrives later on.
Right, any moment now we'll take you to a press conference with 3 immediate family members of those murdered or taken hostage in the October the 7th Hamas massacres in southern Israel.
Yes, and we know that these individuals have both had family members taken from them, and some have had family members sadly killed. We're looking at live pictures of this imminent press conference. Of course, let me just describe the room for those listening on the radio. We have on the one side of the desk the British flag, on the other the Israeli flag, and behind the seats of those who are going to be talking in just some moments' time, missing posters. Posters of family members of these individuals who have been taken in Israel, either been confirmed to be hostages or have been missing since those terrible events just over 2 weeks ago.
Yes, and these appear to be the same posters that we've seen. Oh, we're crossing live to Netanyahu.
Enclave of ISIS, thousands of kilometers away from Europe. It's ISIS in the suburbs of Paris. It's ISIS, you can drive 20 minutes and you reach the suburbs of Paris and you have ISIS there. We cannot live like that. Nobody could live like that. So we are doing everything we need to do to destroy Hamas in Gaza. We will dismantle its terror machine. We will dismantle its political structure. We will make every effort to release our hostages, and we'll make every effort to keep Palestinian civilians out of harm's way. It's important to understand Hamas is committing a double war crime. It's not only murdering our civilians, targeting our civilians, doing unspeakable war crimes. They're also hiding behind civilians, their own civilians. We asked the people of Gaza to leave, to go to a safe zone in the south where we're enabling humanitarian aid to reach them. Hamas is putting checkpoints with people with guns to prevent Palestinians from leaving the war zone. Hamas is responsible for civilian casualties, but we will do every effort to avoid them and to fight this war as speedily and as rapidly as we can, but it could be a long war. When this is over, the people of Israel will rebuild their communities, and the people of Gaza will no longer live under Hamas tyranny. But first, there's one condition for anything that could happen and the good things that could happen once this war is over. And that condition is that Hamas must be destroyed. And I thank you, Emmanuel, for coming here to Israel, for standing with Israel, for standing with us in Israel and expressing your support. We rely on your continued support as this important battle for our future, our common future, proceeds till victory. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, dear Bibi. Thank you for your words, and I want to thank you for the discussion we had together in tete-a-tete and with our delegation, and I'm here to express our support, our solidarity, and our support for today, tomorrow, in all the different fields of this battle against terrorism. If you allow me, I will say a few words in French. I don't know if there is a translation, but I will make sure that you understand. Monsieur le Premier ministre, je suis venu en effet ici exprimer au peuple israélien toutes les condoléances de la France. Ces condoléances sont celles d'un pays ami, éploré devant l'acte terroriste le plus terrible de votre histoire.
For those just joining us, we are listening to a press conference between the French President Emmanuel Macron and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Macron arrived in Israel earlier today, and we've already heard the Israeli Prime Minister talk about Israel's experience with Hamas as if ISIS terrorists were based just miles from Paris. We heard that stark comparison from the Israeli Prime Minister in his introductory remarks. remarks. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, began his remarks in English, is currently speaking French, and we understand will return to speaking in English a little bit later in this press conference. Concurrently, there is a press conference about to start in London with families of some of those taken by Hamas, and when we get news from that, we'll bring you that too. But as I say, currently, Emmanuel Macron and Benjamin Netanyahu speaking at a press conference in Tel Aviv. Let's cross now to Mark White, also in Tel Aviv, our security editor. Mark, how significant is this meeting today?
Well, it's very significant. He is the latest world leader to arrive here into Israel to throw full support behind Israel in its endeavours to go in to take on Hamas, and that will inevitably mean at some point a ground offensive. Now, of course, there's one thing saying what he's saying in public, but I think there's no doubt that in the back channels, France, the UK, the US and alike are urging caution on Israel's part. They want to ensure that as much time is given as possible to the release of the hostages. And we saw, of course, the latest 2 hostages who were released last night, and they have been examined in hospital there and are in good condition despite their ordeal after more than 2 weeks. And in fact, we had a news conference from one of those elderly former hostages, Yocheved Lifshitz, and she really was an incredible woman. The fact that she had just been released a few hours earlier, but felt strong enough to appear before the cameras with her daughter Sharon, who lives in London, to thank everyone for all of their support, but also to say how determined she is to help give the Israelis, the IDF, as much information as she can about the conditions she was held in. It appears she was held in tunnels. She was speaking about a spider web of tunnels that she was taken through. So that kind of information may well be useful to the Israeli Defense Forces as they inevitably go into Gaza, and they may have to look for hostages that are still held there. Were they held above ground, below ground? What kind of conditions are they in? How many people are there guarding them? All of that kind of information, it seems, that she's only too willing to help the Israeli Defense Forces with.
Mark, do we know of any French, Israeli or dual nationals that have been caught up in the hostage situation? Are there any French hostages?
Yes, there are French Israeli hostages, and in fact President Macron met with some of the families of those French Israeli hostages when he arrived in Tel Aviv this morning. I should say as well, there is a schedule, a plan for President Macron once he has concluded his news conference and meetings here in Tel Aviv to head to the West Bank to speak to the Palestinian Authority President, Mahmoud Abbas, one of the very few world leaders to do that. So that is important in and of itself. And it will be interesting to hear what the Palestinian president has to say in terms of a constructive way forward out of this horrible mess that everyone finds themselves in this region at the moment. It seems almost unthinkable to imagine a two-state solution and some kind of diplomatic end to what has happened here, but it will have to happen in the fullness of time, and I think that's what President Macron and other world leaders do have in mind as they are speaking to Israel and also trying to ensure that Israel has uppermost in its mind that at some point there will have to be peace talks, there will have to be a solution put in place for the governance of Gaza and the other Palestinian territories.
Well, Mark, thank you very much for that latest update live from Tel Aviv as the French President and Israeli Prime Minister meet in Jerusalem. We will be now getting a live news update from Ray Addison.
Thanks, guys. Good morning. It's 5 minutes past 11, our top stories. A hostage freed by Hamas says she was taken into tunnels that looked like a spider web. 85-year-old Yocheved Lifshitz, who was released by her kidnappers last night, also says she was treated well and was seen by a doctor during her ordeal. Hamas says she was returned along with another Israeli, Nurit Cooper, on humanitarian grounds. Their husbands are still being held. Her daughter, Sharon, who was a British citizen, translated her comments during a news conference.
My mum is saying that she was taken on the back of a motorbike with her body, with her legs on one side and her head on another side, that she was taken through the ploughed fields with a man in front on one side and a man behind her, and that while she was being taken, she was hit by sticks by Shabab. Yeah, Shabab people. Until they reached the tunnels. There they walked for a few kilometers on the wet ground. There are a huge network of tunnels underneath. It looks like a spider web.
Meanwhile, Israel's military says it's ready for the next stage of the war. A spokesperson says they're awaiting political instruction and anticipating long weeks of fighting ahead. The IDF's aerial assault in Gaza is also intensifying, with more than 400 targets hit overnight and dozens of Hamas terrorists killed. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry says more than 120 civilians died in the latest strikes. More than 40 trucks are now waiting by the border to enter Gaza. That's despite US President Joe Biden urging for a continuous flow of humanitarian aid to the Strip. Yesterday, a third convoy of 20 trucks delivered water, food and medicine, taking the total to 54 since Saturday. However, the UN is warning that fuel was not included in the delivery and reserves could run out tomorrow. A rescue effort is underway after two ships collided in the North Sea. The incident involving British-flagged vessel the Verity happened off the German coast, southwest of Heligoland. It crashed with the Polsey at around 4 o'clock this morning. One person was rescued from the water. Several others are still missing. The Verity, which was on its way from Bremen to Immingham in Lincolnshire, reportedly sank. Well, parts of the UK devastated by floods are facing another deluge. A yellow weather warning for heavy rain has been issued for the East Midlands and Yorkshire, hitting areas which are still recovering from Storm Babette. The Met Office says there's a small chance that homes and businesses could again be flooded. The warning will remain in place until 4 p.m. Kevin Maunder, who lives in Retford, says the recent weather has been difficult.
To start, despair. Oh no, not again. The water slowly crept in and there was nothing we could do. So I'm old, I get quite philosophical and think, well, c'est la vie, what will be will be. I can't alter it. I don't know what we could do. We just had to hope for the best. We were very lucky. It didn't come right through ours. Some of the neighbours, it's just devastation it was when we was helping them out.
OK, let's take you live now to central London, where family members of those murdered or taken hostage by Hamas are speaking.
Thousands of people wounded from this massacre. Our duty is to speak out for those people taken hostages by Hamas and to raise the world's attention. We need those families back home with us. We have today 4 representatives of the families. We have, I start with Ofri Bibas, who will tell her story. We have David Bar, and we have, just the name, Ayelet Svatitsky, who are here to speak today. We also have Noam Sagi, who is available for questions. His mother has been taken hostage by Hamas. She is 75. So first, our speakers will tell their stories, then we'll have time for questions. And if after the press conference some of you are interested in having doing interviews, please go through us, through our team, and we'll arrange that for you. Again, thank you for coming, and the floor is yours. You want to start, Ayelet?
Ofri, you want to start?
No. Okay, not today.
Thank you. Is it okay? Thank you all for coming. My name is Ayelet Svetitsky. I'm 46 years old. I'm married. I've got 3 teenagers at home. I live in the north, about 2 hours from the Gaza border and about an hour north of Tel Aviv. On October 7th, around 8 in the morning, I woke up to my husband's voice. He was speaking on the phone, which was pretty unusual, so early on a Shabbat morning. And he said, something bad's happening down south, call your mom now. So I grabbed my phone, and as I opened my Can you hear me? Yeah. As I opened my phone, I saw my childhood friends. We have a okay, thank you. I saw my childhood friends. We have a mutual WhatsApp group saying that there's a missile attack and also a ground invasion by Hamas terrorists, and that they were inside my family's kibbutz. So I called my mother frantically, and I said, go in the safe room, lock the door, don't let anyone in, don't answer. Little did they know, you can't lock the door from the inside because this was never thought of. So the room is designed concrete and metal to shelter them from rockets, but there isn't a lock. She said the house wasn't locked, and the next thing I heard were man's voices speaking to her in English with an accent Arabic. Maybe they heard her speaking English to me. My mother was born and raised in South Africa. So I immediately realized what was happening, and I knew they got to her. So I hung up the phone, and I called my brother. He lives next door, 10 meters from her. And I said, go in the safe room, lock the door, don't let anyone else in. I don't know what's happening at Mom's, because I didn't want to tell him what I already knew, because I wanted him to react and not to panic. And the next thing I heard the same voices speaking to him, so I realized they got him too. I called a friend on the kibbutz just to let them know that the terrorists were at my mom's and at my brother's, and to send help, but no one could get there because our little security guards were already engaged in battle with terrorist groups on other neighborhoods in the kibbutz. Then I got 2 pictures. Minutes later, sent to me from my mom's phone to mine, showing. I can do this without a mic if you want. Yeah. Is it? Can everyone hear me? Okay. So the next thing, I got 2 pictures sent to me from my mom's phone to mine, showing my mother sitting in the living room, still in her nightwear. My brother sitting on the sofa. So they brought my brother from his house to hers. He was dressed but barefoot. Underneath the 2 pictures it said in English, Hamas. A 3rd picture of the same series Hamas uploaded to my mom's Facebook story. So my mom is 79. She doesn't know how to upload images to Facebook story, so someone else did that. The pictures are not a selfie, so it's obvious they were taken by a 3rd party. And that was the last I heard of them. I later learned a neighbor saw them being taken, walked out of the house and taken by foot. But I didn't know that at the time. I've only learned that a couple of days later, that they were actually seen walked out the house. So the next few hours, I was just
waiting for the army to get to my mom's house and see what they could find. The first few hours, I thought they were gone, dead. Both my mom and my brother. I thought they were probably murdered. The news of civilians being kidnapped only started circulating around noon. So until noon, I didn't even imagine the possibility. I just thought that I've lost them. And all I wanted was my other brother and my friends and my friends' families out. Because I figured this tragedy hit me. It's going to hit me really hard. I don't want anyone else to go through what I'm about to go through. Around noon, the news about the kidnapping started circulating, and then I started thinking maybe the pictures were proof of life, maybe they were taking. I didn't even know what was the better option, being killed or being kidnapped by Hamas. So it was a waiting period until around 7 in the evening, when the army managed to get to my mom and my brother's house, and I got a phone call from their kibbutz telling me my mom and my brother were missing, and so was my older brother. I wasn't in touch with him all day because we never spoke during a missile attack or an event. We always spoke after. So I wasn't in touch with him. I was informed he was missing too. His phone was found in his house. The next day, 9 o'clock in the morning, I drove to the nearest police station to my house to file a formal missing persons report and to submit my DNA. And as I went into the police station, I received a phone call from my family's kibbutz that my oldest brother Roy, who was 54, was found. His body was found at daylight. He was shot dead behind his house, murdered. So I filed a missing report for my mom and my brother. The mass casualties bodies are still being identified as we speak because of the numbers and because of the conditions of those who were murdered. 18 days later, my brother's body hasn't been identified officially just yet. I'm 46 years old. My life at the moment is worrying for my diabetic mom and brother who are being held by Hamas. My mother needs insulin shots. I don't know if she's getting them and how long she can survive without them. And then on the end, I'm chasing dental records and x-rays and filing forms asking me if my brother had scars or tattoos, or which he didn't. So trying to identify my brother so we can bury him and bring him to rest, and then bringing my mom and my other brother home. So this has been my life for the last 18 days now. 18 days. I find it when I ask people what day is it, they say Monday or Tuesday, and I count by numbers. No, it's day 18. Our life stopped on the 7th of October. I try not to deal with my loss of my brother at the moment because I find it too painful, and if I start thinking about that, then it will hurt too much and it'll break me, and I don't have the privilege of breaking because I have a mission and I need to be efficient and effective and productive, trying to get the Red Cross to our family members, to see them, to get lists of who's been taken. These are 18 days later. We haven't had any information. Are they getting the medications that they need? So we're chasing information. We're trying to get the hostages help, and we're trying to get information out. And we don't have that just yet. I'll show you the. This is my mom. She was supposed to be in London now on a holiday with my brother Nadav. They've had tickets booked, a hotel, shows. On Sunday, I had to cancel everything because they were in Gaza, and they're still there. This picture was taken on their last trip on the airport on the way to London, because they came here often. This is my brother Nadav. He's 51. They're just simple people living on a small agriculture community. A kibbutz is the closest thing you can imagine to a village where everybody knows everyone. We all go to the same schools. I know people from the kibbutzes around us. It's that type of a community. We're farmers. My brother, who was murdered, worked in the dairy many years, like my dad did for 35 years. My dad passed away years ago. I worked in the dairy as a young teenager. This is the life we lived. It's a quiet, simple, peaceful life that's been shattered to pieces on October 7th. And all we did was work in the fields and milk the cows. And now my brother is dead. And my family is being held against their will in Gaza, and I'm here to raise awareness for my family, for all families who have young children and Holocaust survivors, and young women and men, elderly, in medical need. And I'm here to speak for my family and for and to be the voice for everyone who can't be here with us now. This is a humanitarian crisis. This is a crime, a war crime, and the hostages have to be released and returned. This isn't a political issue. This is a human crisis, and we demand the return of our loved ones home so we can start healing from this trauma. Thank you.
My name is Ofri Bibas Levi.
There to Ayelet Savitsky, who's been speaking about her mother, who is 79, her brother, who's 51, who were taken hostage. Her other brother was also murdered, as we've heard. We're joined by Nigel Nelson and Tonya Buxton, who have been listening to this press conference. And Nigel, your reaction first of all?
Well, I mean, it just shows the horror that these hostages have been facing, and appeals like this. I'm not sure that you can actually get through to Hamas on the basis of the humanitarian need. To actually, the humane thing to do is to release these people. But it certainly it certainly should help to actually show the world what people are actually suffering at the moment.
Yes, Tonya, her brother, she has two brothers. Her other brother murdered by Hamas. Two family members still missing. You can hear from her voice just how awful this is for her. She talks about raising awareness for other families too.
I mean, I admire her. I admire her for being brave enough to go up and talk about it. I would be broken. But yes, she's trying to raise awareness of other families. She's actually, if Hamas aren't listening to this, hopefully people around the world who are shouting jihadi in these protests all around the world will be listening to this and show a bit of humanity. That's the thing that's been missing from all of this. There has been very little humanity shown through to those that are kidnapped and the family of the kidnapped. And hopefully by these people coming forward and speaking about their experiences, people will understand this is beyond evil.
No, really, really stark to listen to Mrs. Savitsky say, I didn't know what was better. What was the better option, being killed or being kidnapped by Hamas? And it's that sense of uncertainty in terms of what are they doing to those people in those tunnels, particularly what are they doing to those children?
Yeah, well, what we had, if you remember, I mean, last week we had the father who was saying it was a blessing that his daughter was killed rather than actually taken hostage, which shows the kind of fear that people have, certainly in that part of Israel, for Hamas and what they might do to them. I mean, you know, you can't live there without having a safe room which is barricaded to stop these people getting in.
Also, Tonya, incredibly difficult for the Israeli government and defence forces. They're planning a ground assault. Of course, concerns that some of their missiles, their strikes into Gaza could hurt hostages, Israeli hostages too. Very difficult for them to control the impact.
Very difficult, and this is where they have to be really, really careful, and not just the Israeli hostages. You know, there are Palestinian children who are being killed constantly, and the problem is that Hamas is not allowing a lot of the Palestinian people to come out. That is also added. So all of these innocent people, innocents being slaughtered, either way is horrific. But I do really, really urge Israel to try and infiltrate better. You know, we know that Mossad, they're capable of infiltrating Hamas. They need to infiltrate better and try and get these hostages out alive, because it's too hard. Can you imagine being the mothers, the sisters, the partners of people that are taken away and just not knowing what's going on? And as that father said, he was thanking God that his daughter was dead rather than be kidnapped. And that must be how these people are feeling. But across the board, there is pain and suffering. We've got to be careful how we proceed now.
Yes, and the Palestinian Health Ministry has said more than 5,000 people have been killed in Gaza over the past 2 weeks. Those are their figures coming from the Palestinian Health Ministry. Huge humanitarian crisis unfolding.
Absolutely. Let's dip back in to listen to the words of Ofri Bibas Levi, who is speaking now. Her brother, along with his whole family, have been taken by Hamas.
He was bleeding from his head. The terrorist on another picture is really strangling him. On this picture, I can see there's a hammer here with blood on it, and my brother's head is bleeding. And those pictures and the Shiri's video with the kids is our last sign of life from them, 18 days ago. And ever since, it's like living in a nightmare. The pictures keep running in front of my eyes. I feel guilty for eating. I feel guilty for sleeping in my own bed. I feel guilty for playing with my children or covering my children at night. She's 4 years old. She's Ariel's best friend. Just 2 days before the attack, Ariel was telling his mom, Shiri, that he wants to leave the kibbutz and come live next to us, next to my daughter. They were planning on leaving the area. They couldn't bear living in this anxiety anymore with the missiles. We never imagined anything like this happening. Yeah, and now yesterday they were talking about freeing some hostages. It's really confusing. It's like a psychological torture for us, the families, hearing that they're releasing this one or this one. We want them all of them back, and we want all of them back now together. And we need all of you to spread it and making the important people in the government and all around the world just putting an end to this horrible story. Thank you.
My name's David Bar, originally from Leeds. I've been living in Israel since 1984 and on Kibbutz Halomim. since 1991. Kibbutz is actually built on two pioneering groups from England, from the youth group of Bnei Akiva. I'll start by answering Ayelet. It was easier to bury our loved ones than to go through the anguish that they're going through. And I can't believe I'm saying that. We buried my sister-in-law, Naomi. It took 4 days to identify what we call the smile of the south of Israel. She was well known. She worked as a dental assistant, and in the past few years also as a keep fit freak. She simply went for a run near Kibbutz Yad Mordechai towards Netiv Asara, the Eretz crossing. And although it took a few hours because they took shelter because of the missiles, she was shot in the back and shot again in the head at point blank range. When we mourned her death, we sat for a week, we were left with guilty feelings. Mourning for her, wait a minute, look what's going on. Thinking of the others, why aren't we thinking of her? Life is turned upside down by death, by hatred, by evil people, monsters. Kibbutz Halomim is a religious settlement, a religious kibbutz which sits between Kfar Aza and Kibbutz Be'eri, and together with all the other kibbutzim and moshavim, we're all one people, 15 to 18,000 people who live in the area who have all been evacuated. That's what I have. I left. Felt like my father who left Vienna in 1939. 6:30 that morning, the rockets came over, but we're used to that. 20 years we've had it. The family that we went to stay with until the body could be identified live in a place called Nitzan, between Ashdod and Ashkelon.
We've been listening here to David Barr, a man originally from Leeds who moved to Israel and whose sister-in-law and mother of three was murdered, shot in the head at point-blank range while on her normal morning run. He said there it was easier to bury his loved ones than it must have been for the two women sitting either side of him at that press conference who just don't know what is happening to their family taken hostage. Tonya, some really stark moments in that testimony.
Absolutely stark. The fact that they said it took 4 days to be able to know that it was Naomi because she was shot at point-blank range. It's horrifying. The image is horrifying. But do you know what this is also reminding me of? We can see all those posters behind there of all the kidnapped children and people. And if you're a Jew living in London or living in Britain, it's the one thing that you could do is put up those pictures so you feel like you're doing something. And then we saw the footage of those young Muslim girls pulling them down and saying that they're doing it for Palestine. Can you see the way that this hatred is so twisted and disgusting?
And that's exactly what David Barr there, who is continuing to speak, was saying, how life has been turned upside down by hatred, evil, monsters. Before we heard from David, we heard from another woman, Ofri Bibas Levi, whose brother, wife, whole family taken hostage and still are missing.
Yes, and I think that, you know, what Offrey said, what really sort of struck me was what she described as the psychological torture all the families are going through. Here you have a situation where a few of the hostages are being released. They want to know what is happening to their own loved ones, the rest of them. So each one that comes out it is a torture for them to see that, knowing that their loved ones are still being held there. I mean, one assumes there is some kind of deal going on behind the scenes that brokered probably by Qatar to start getting the hostages out. But we are only getting them out in dribs and drabs. We're still talking about at least 200 being still there.
And Macron, the French president, we went live to a joint press statement with him and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister. One of the priorities in those conversations, it is reported, is to prioritise the return of hostages first and foremost.
But they're not going to do it, are they? They're just going to keep stringing everything along in these drips and drabs. One hostage here, one hostage there. Then they're not going to release them all. I don't believe they're all alive. And so I just don't think they're going to release them all. So I don't know what situation is. We are in the modern day, it's 2023, and we are living through a horror that no one could imagine. This is unimaginable horror. And it's incredible that we have no solutions to this, no way of fixing this. But Hamas, whatever you think, they have to go. They have to be obliterated from humanity because what they've done is evil. And they knew by doing this that it would set off this chain of events where all there is suffering and dying for all the people involved.
And what a stark reminder when David Barr said there that he felt like his father, who fled Vienna in 1939, who fled that persecution just because he was Jewish. Now, David Barr has had to leave Israel, evacuate his home because of the same sort of Jew hate that exists in that part of the world. Israel was supposed to be the safe place where Jewish people could go and not be persecuted, as they have been for 2 millennia. And now not even that is a safe place for them. It should really send a tingle down everyone's spines that this persecuted minority can't even feel safe in what is supposed to be their own homeland. We'll have much, much more reaction to this breaking news here on GB News after this.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows...
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's on your teeth.
It's on your teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver, and Tom Harwood. Before the break, we were live with a press conference taking place in London with 3 immediate family members of those murdered and taken hostage by Hamas. We're going to move on. We have our panel with us, Tonya Buxton and Nigel Nelson, who will be reviewing some other stories in the papers this morning. Firstly, GB News exclusive Nigel Nelson. Farage debanking row continues. He's found out some more information.
Yes, he has, and it's quite extraordinary. He's managed to get hold of some of the emails that he's actually entitled to get because it's his private information he's been asking the bank to release. And the kind of things that the staff were saying, they were talking about happy to actually cancel his bank account because it might drive him out of the country. When another member of staff joked about wanting to throw a milkshake over him. Now, this is just unacceptable. It's unacceptable in any kind of retail outlet. If you go in to buy a burger in McDonald's, you don't want to find out that one of the staff wanted to throw a milkshake over you as you were buying it. So I think that Nigel is absolutely right that these people should be suspended for what they have done. This is not professional in any way, but it does show how he was specifically targeted because of his political beliefs.
And we can see the message on screen there, lacking in capitalisation and grammar as it is. I'd throw a milkshake at him if I was approached to open an account for him. Tonya, I mean, this is pretty stark stuff.
It really is stark stuff. Who the hell are these people that think that they can debank people? Having a bank account is a human right. And also, this particular bank is owned by us, is us, the public. So how dare they? I don't think they should be suspended. I think they should be sacked for this behaviour. And don't forget, there was lots of other people that were debanked and deplatformed, not just with NatWest Bank, but also with PayPal. These companies are taking themselves too far. They do not have the right to govern and to decide who should have an account or not have an account. People like Us for Them, which is a charity that's put together to look after children, they lost their banking. It's absolutely ridiculous this is going on. Good on Nigel. I mean, thank goodness it happened in one way. Thank goodness it happened to Nigel because he wasn't going to take it lying down.
No.
And all the more other people, rather, who have the same views and who don't have his profile wouldn't be able to have spoken up the way he has.
And we were just seeing some more of those messages on screen. I wonder if we can get them up again, because this is the stark language that we were seeing from employees at the NatWest Group, who, of course, removed his bank account, saying, "It's just you're an awful human being, Nigel Farage. Lol." Nigel, should awful human beings be entitled to bank accounts?
Yes, indeed they should. Yes, it doesn't matter whether you're awful, nice, beautiful, ugly, whatever it is, that you should actually be able to get a bank account. Of course you should. And the problem with this is what they need to do, in fact, is actually review these rules over politically exposed persons, as they call them, which gives the bank a right to cancel them. And, I mean, the one thing Nigel has done is showed just how many politicians it was actually happening to, and other people in the country, if you fall into that category. A lot of people, I mean, I've talked to a number of MPs now who found themselves in the same problem, and they said they didn't want to come forward because they didn't want to reveal their private details and reveal they couldn't get a bank account. So what Nigel has done is a public service, and now the rules around all this need to be reviewed properly.
I mean, Nigel, a number of high-profile journalists did jump the gun a little bit when it came to this whole story, assuming that the bank must have behaved properly. And now we see boasting about driving him out of the country, Nigel Farage, that is, which is quite extraordinary, actually, and particularly, as Nigel, he said himself last night on his show, he did actually say, will I have to leave the country if I can't get a bank account?
Yeah, absolutely. And comments like, it just shows you how pathetic and immature, like, who even are you anymore? I mean, the language of these messages as well, you know what type of person it is that's writing them. And for example, thank goodness again for Nigel, I keep saying that because Dominic Lawson couldn't get a bank account for his daughter who has special needs because of her grandfather. I mean, it's outrageous that these banks and these companies have this type of power. So this absolutely needs to go into law that they do not have the power to do that anymore.
Antonia, we're looking at a message on this screen, again, with questionable grammar. Comma, have we single-handedly drive Nigel Farage out of the country? I think they mean driven. But grammar and spelling aside, this is triumphalist stuff, trying to push people out. And also, here's one saying, "What's the crackpot saying now?" It's just pure bile.
Yeah, and the other thing is that they're actually sort of behaving. I mean, we don't know what level these people are in the bank, but they're behaving like
They sound like they're interns.
Well, exactly.
Of course they're not.
Yeah, well, they certainly haven't learned how to write English. But they're behaving like judge, jury and executioner. That is not their job. That they're there certainly to obey the rules, which is why the rules must be changed. I mean, on the serious side, a bank can be fined if it doesn't carry out the due diligence on people like this. What you don't expect is all the insults coming from staff and, hey, this is great. I mean, it's all playground stuff, and that's why these people must be found out. The bank must deal with them. I think a suspension is probably right, but rather than a sacking.
You know, Nigel, what was quite funny was that there was one person, Nigel Farage revealed their message, I don't know if we have it, who said something like, "Oh, Nigel Farage, he's all right, actually. Spoke to him on the phone." he wouldn't mind him as one client. So there was one person in these messages that did stand up for him ever so slightly. But shall we move on? Because in The Sun, Coronation Street offered me security after surge in anti-Semitic hate. These are the words of Maureen Lipman, Tonya.
So this is the thing that I've been talking about ever since these attacks, is why is it that, because I live in North London, it's quite a Jewish area, and the Jewish schools and the synagogues already have security. They already have extra security. Now they've had to up their security. A couple of Fridays ago, my neighbours didn't send their children to school. So why is that? Why we do have a problem with anti-Semitism in this country for those schools to have already had that security. And Maureen Lipman, who's on Coronation Street, for them to feel the need to give her extra security is unbelievable. But I just wanted to say that she was one of the signatories of the October Declaration. She talks about it in The Sun, as some other high-profile politicians and actors and actresses.
And this is a statement. And this is a statement of support for Israel.
It's a statement of support for British Jews. Okay, they should not be born, bred, living in this country and have to to live with fear. And that's what Hamas does so well. It makes you live in fear. I don't know if you remember, I was supposed to go 2 Fridays ago, I was supposed to take the Eurostar tunnel. And my daughter was so upset about me taking the tunnel, going under the tunnel, because it was announced as a national day of jihad. That if it was up to me, I would have gone. But I didn't go because she was so distressed about me going, I didn't go. So it is working. The living in fear is working to all Jewish people and to all people who fear some kind of jihadi in Britain.
Yeah, and I think some people, a minority, are quite quick to dismiss that level of fear.
Yeah, well, they shouldn't.
But it's real. It's real. You know, I've spoken to Jewish people who are very concerned, and non-Jewish people.
Yeah, I mean, the incidence of anti-Semitism have gone up hugely, as has Islamophobia. But with Maureen Lipman, she's always been a pretty outspoken person about Israel and British Jews. And again, she was recently pretty outspoken again when she attacked Steve Coogan and a number of other celebrities who put out a supportive message about war crimes that Israel was committing without condemning Hamas, and she called them bleeding, heartless liberals.
Now, it must be said that Steve Coogan has subsequently come out and condemned Hamas, but it's interesting he did it in that order.
Yes, I mean, it would be useful if he'd said so in the first place, really. So she has been outspoken, but again, she shouldn't need security to exercise her right to freedom of speech, and that's what this whole thing seems to be losing.
Yeah, a lot of people are worried they may become a target, I imagine. But shall we move on to the Mirror? Because Prince William will never tell people not to use planes or cars to help the environment. What's all this about, Tonya?
Good man, good man. He's not a hypocrite like his brother. That's all I can say. What he's doing is the Earthshot Awards that are going on. He's actually taking a commercial airline to go over to this week-long meetings of trying to find things to help fix the environment. There's a £1 million grant for environmental work, so that's what the winner receives. And I get this. I mean, there's lots of ways that we can save the planet instead of stopping normal people from getting on planes and driving their cars. This is a human need. I want to get on a plane and I want to be able to drive my car, but I want to save the planet. And one of the first things that we can do, and this is one of the things he said as well, is we can stop plastic. Plastic is killing the world. It's killing the seas. It's killing the world. If unilaterally we all banned plastics and no longer use them, that would make a big difference to the chance.
Quite useful, though, aren't they? Plastics, Tonya?
No, they're not. They're really not. And you know,
medical equipment, perhaps.
Well, you know, if they're needed in very specific things, but there are alternatives that we can use. And I'm talking more about the plastics that are in supermarkets, single use, even Tupperwares and things like that. You know, plastic boxes. We don't need them. They could be glass, because every single fish that you eat now has some plastic in it.
I would wager that it's more environmentally damaging and certainly uses much more energy to make glass than make plastic.
Yes, but it doesn't damage. When it comes to the energy and what CO2 we are doing to the world and whether that has an effect, that science is still out. You know,
I don't think it is.
Yeah, but plastic doesn't break down, does it?
I don't think it's fair to say that the science is out on whether CO2 affects the climate. I think the greenhouse effect is fairly settled science.
Well, I'm not entirely sure that's true. I think that you have to look through history of what's happening with the CO effect and how much we as men, me as mankind, are affecting that. That's a whole other story. That's a whole story. But the main thing is that if we didn't have plastics are poisoning us and our children. The seas are suffering. They're breaking down because they're full of pollutant plastics. If we could just do that one thing, stop single use and stop kind of casual use of plastics, that would make a big difference to the world.
And yet, for example, if you were to buy fruit in a supermarket that's wrapped in plastic, it might have twice the shelf life than if it wasn't wrapped in plastic and was oxidising in a normal way.
No,
in some ways, that sort of plastic wrapping can be more environmentally friendly because it extends the shelf life. We're not throwing away all this food.
No, I completely disagree with you. There are more modern ways, and there are coverings that you can have of food that are not plastics, that are biodegradable, that you don't need to use the easy, cheap plastics. It's a big money-making industry. That's why they're not changing it and converting it. And when it comes to excesses of food, we have too much food flown in from other countries countries here anyway. We should reduce it as it is and try and be a bit more sustainable ourselves.
I would certainly agree with you that when we're talking about climate change, Tonya, we should focus on our immediate environment, and plastics in our seas and rivers, not a
Plastics
good
in the
thing.
sea have nothing to do with climate change.
No, but it's the environment. It's our environment.
It's different. It's litter. It's just litter.
Anyway.
I mean, litter's bad, but it's different from CO2. Anyway, I'm so sorry. We have run out of time. We could have spoken about this for hours, but up next, it's the live desk with Pip Thompson and Mark Longhurst. Pip is for us here. What's coming up today?
Hello there. Well, just getting this information in, actually. We have heard from hostages' families within the last hour, hostages being held in Gaza. The IDF is now using a new tactic to communicate with residents of Gaza, offering them protection and compensation in return for the hostages that have been captured by Hamas. We'll be talking to our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Mark White, about that. Plus, Storm Babette, it's wreaked so much havoc, hasn't it? And there are new weather warnings that have just been issued in the southeast and the southwest of England. We'll bring you the latest.
Well, thank you very much, Pip. Stay tuned for the live desk with Pip Thompson and Mark Longhurst for that breaking news. But sadly, we've come to the end of our show, Tom.
I know, it's sad. I feel like we could have spoken about all of these issues for a good few hours more. But I
3
suppose
hours on plastics alone, I'd say. But yes, Britain's Newsroom is back tomorrow at 9:30. You're with GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's...
Hello again, it's Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. It's a wet picture today. Many of us will see some heavy rain or a scattering of showers, but also some sunny spells. Starting off looking at the bigger picture, and there are various low pressure systems out in the Atlantic. They are going to bring unsettled weather through this week, but at the moment we have a low pressure in the North Sea, and that is bringing some blustery winds to some North Sea coastal parts, but also a spell of heavy persistent rain across eastern northeastern parts of England. Here we could see totals building up, risk of some disruptions, some flooding is possible. Elsewhere, some sunny spells, and in the sunny spells, temperatures not doing too badly. Highs of around 15, possibly 16 Celsius, but there will also be quite a few showers around today as well. As we go later on, we are going to see that rain over eastern northeastern England easing a little bit, but some heavy rain then pushing into more southern parts of England and perhaps Wales. Again, here we could see some high totals, so some disruption is quite likely, some flooding is possible. For many, it's going to be a chillier night tonight, particularly in western parts where we have some clear skies, perhaps